assume in this country is that the separation of church and state is necessary, and we talk about it as a basic value in our society. But I'd like to hear from the panel as to whether this is absolutely considered necessary for the functioning of a democracy as diverse as ours, considering that some European countries have state churches, England, the Scandinavian countries. I think Germany still maybe has an official state religion. So to what extent are we getting exercised over something that may not essentially be an issue? Let's switch up the order, because you're writing the notes, I can see. Joe, why don't we start with you?
As you were talking about other countries, I'm just thinking about Germany, where after World War II and after the Marshall Plan, they wanted to repay or do a kind of a Marshall Plan in their own outreach, and they taxed the churches to gather this money, and then they gave it to the Catholic bishops to dispense. It's a program called Adveniat, and the other one is Miserio. It was tied with Advent, Christmas time, and Miserio tied with Lent in Lenten time. And this was an okay thing in the country, and then the Protestant was saying, well, we're not organized to do this, but they went to the Catholic bishop and said, okay. Now here's religious organizations getting a rather large sum of money to basically go into Latin America. They were sort of aiming at that, and I myself put in about $300,000 from Germany in the building of, constructing of chapels in where I worked in Guatemala. And it worked. It worked well, and everybody seemed to be happy about it, and it was being generated out of the sense of we were helped, let us help now. So, can you imagine what that would be like in the United States to ask for funds to do that? I'm not suggesting that we do, but just the attitudes of how you handle that. I'm on the board of the 3IG. It's called the International Interfaith 3IG Investment Group, and it was called together by Prince Philip in England to bring these 10 major groups: Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, Sikhs, Christians, Jewish, and so forth, to bring them together to help gather the momentum of the wealth that the churches have basically in the world. They talk something like about $6 to $8 trillion of wealth. To use that in various ways to help the sustainability of the world. The Church of Norway and the Church of Sweden got together, and they had a program go on in Mozambique for reforestation. I've been asking for a big effort on water. But here you have these major groups, and they may disagree in other ways, but it's fun sitting down at a table with the bearded rabbi and with the everybody in their different outfits. And it's, wow, this is incredible. And Islam has a certain way of investing. Judaism has a certain way of investing. And my investment advisor, I invited her over to this thing, and she was shown how both of them could invest in the same product. And one could take their legal, ritualistic money out this way, and the other could do it the other way. So they could be investing together, and you say, how do you bring Jews and Islam together like that? It's that kind of stuff. And it's combining church and state in many ways. We have chose to be independent because of how we started our nation. And it was, we're not going to be run by any one group. We're we're not going to be a theocracy. We're going to be a democracy, and we can blend in our feelings, our morality, and what have you, into the collective entity that elects government. So it can be done, depends on the attitude. It's terrible, I'm not sure if I'm on the subject right now or not, but it's terrible to see Islam being crucified because they're Islam. 95% of the world doesn't want war. 95% of the world wants peace. There's that 5% or whatever who live off of the violence of church against church. And the 95% just sit there and watch it. Why don't they say something about it? Why don't they do something about it? In my own church, we worry about abortion, we worry about homosexuality, we worry about those things. But where's the worry about famine? Where's the worry about corporate social responsibility? Where is the effort to reach out and realize in a positive way their moral structures to be offered to the people?
All right, that's one where the line doesn't seem to be necessarily as strict as some of us think it should be. We've got an opposite point of view about why keeping the line between state and church is necessary. Anyone speak to it?
I do.
Okay.
I do. It's an awkward phrase, separation of church and state. It does not appear in the Constitution. One Tea Party candidate was right, although she wasn't sure. And it is an awkward phrase. And there's a great story of the first George Bush, who was a candidate in 1988 and was asked how he felt being marooned out at sea and lying for days on the floor of this boat. And he said, well, I thought about things that matter, like God and country, and he was going on. And then he finally said, oh, and of course, separation of church and state. You couldn't talk that way without talking about separation of church and state. And honestly, it is an awkward phrase, and it is not in our founding documents. But religious liberty is a deeply held and widely admired element of our society. And the two travel together, the separation of church and state on the one hand and respect for religious exercise on the other. They really are mutually dependent. And separation of church and state has come to mean an awkward and doctrinaire secularism. And that's recent. The phrase as it has long been understood and frequently acted upon is a distinction between who has secular authority and who has religious authority. It does not mean that neither voice may be heard in the other realm. And I take the point about constructing chapels. There was some difficulty, for example, rebuilding churches after Katrina. Could federal money go to help reconstructing? It got worked out eventually, but yes, some things are made harder. But the vibrant and creative religious life we see in this country is in part dependent on the difference between church and state and the well-understood difference. And that creates what economists would call low barriers to entry, meaning that it is much easier to start a church, to start any religious organization in a country with separation of church and state than it is without one. And that goes not only for most of Western Europe, but South Africa and beyond. This is the vibrant, the creative, the alive, diverse country. It's remarkable. We are the most deeply religious of all the developed countries in the world. You pay a price for that, but it's also an enormous benefit. So I am grateful, if not for the phrase separation of church and state, the idea that there's a distinction.
I agree. I think that there is something very inspiring about the idea of religious liberty to the extent that you have a prohibition against the government taking religious positions. And I think it does protect religion as well as, it protects people of, non-religious people from having religion imposed on them. It also protects even a religious majority from having their religion be sort of colonized by the state. And I think the faith-based initiative that George Bush introduced, I think it should be worrisome to people who are involved in religious organizations that this is a kind of way for the government to make religious institutions dependent on them. And I think it does, the idea that you need to have a secular justification for any legislation, which is in large part what the Establishment Religion Clause means in judicial practice, I think is really a helpful thing to a pluralistic society. And it's something that we would abandon at our peril. I think that the secular media really fall down on the job in defending this vision. And the example that looms large for me is a few years back when the Pledge of Allegiance was being challenged because of the under God phrase. I wrote about this for Extra, the response of pundits to this challenge. It was almost universally hostile. The idea that having as the official oath of the United States the phrase "under God," which was put in there by Eisenhower specifically to brand us as a religious nation in opposition to godless communism. In the pundit class, this was almost universally seen as a frivolous lawsuit, a pernicious lawsuit that's only going to raise trouble. And you had a weird, like on the one hand, this phrase meant nothing, and on the other hand, if you took it out, you'd have civil war. Which I really find it's kind of hard to believe in both those positions at the same time, but that was basically the position of the media, was that we should not, and it's basically like let's not talk about that. It's like the penny says in God we trust. Let's just ignore that.